When I first knew you, we always had lots of people coming to visit in this house. When did that start?
Well, right from the word go, I think, people came.
Yes.
Especially when the Ridley students came to help.
Yes.
They used to come and help with the evening service.
That's right.
And come up for supper afterwards.
Yes.
And Mrs. Brightwell. Well, she wasn't Mrs. Brightwell then.
No,
Miss Thompson.
Miss Thompson.
Miss Thompson.
Indeed, yes. Very much a spinster lady at the time, we all thought. Yes.
Yes, she enjoyed coming. And for years, I mean, she came for the rest of her life, always on a Sunday evening.
Yes.
And then we did have the foreign students who came to stay before the war. They used to come as paying guests. Pierre from Paris, and we had Uli from Czechoslovakia. And they came in the summer, and we played tennis and freaked around. And
how do you get in touch with people like that? Was there a sort of students?
My mother, yes, my mother belonged to well, I don't think they called it a club, but a gathering of people in Cambridge who looked after foreign students, who sort of welcomed them and made them feel at home. Yeah. And I suppose through maybe through the newspaper, I can't remember. Yeah. She arranged that. During the war, we had 50 soldiers to breakfast. They were billeted in Madingley Hall.
50?
50, and I went around the village collecting eggs, asking people for eggs. And I had a great big preserving pan, and I remember boiling these eggs, and of course the ones in the bottom were hard, and the ones on the top, there were so many eggs, they were at all the different stages. And
I never tried boiling 50 eggs at one time.
We sat them all around, well, not all of them, but most of them around the dining room table. But I can remember, I don't know, I suppose we did it in relays, probably. But that was rather fun.
I trust you didn't have 50 every Sunday.
No, that was only once. That was just once. Easter Sunday.
Oh, I see. Yes.
Easter Sunday.
There had to be eggs, of course.
Yes.
My goodness.
And we had a dog that, Bruce, the dog was Bruce, and he joined the army. He joined them at Madingley.
Oh, did he?
And they kept bringing him back on their motorbike. He'd sit up on the tank. And kept bringing this dog back, and he wouldn't stay. He'd just go off again.
Back again.
They finally took him to Europe with them.
Oh, goodness.
As their mascot. But I thought, well, if he's... I remember he was ill, and we nursed him, my mother and I, and we thought, oh, he'll stay with us now because we've made such a fuss of him. But no. I think he got a lot of food at Madingley.
Oh, probably, yes.
But to go back to the war years, we had these Dutch people used to come and stay. What you were saying, they were in the RAF, and it was John who Joop was his name. A small plane crashed in the field beyond the church, and I remember he rushed off down, and I sort of saw him because I went after him, not the whole way, but most of it. He leapt. He actually flew over the hedges. You know, he took a running jump and was jumped over the hedges. Anyway, the pilot was all right. It was a small trainer, I think, from Marshall's. But he very much wanted to be a pilot. He came over to be a pilot. And that's what he was doing in Cambridge. They were training pilots. And but they wouldn't accept him because of the language. He was a Dutch South African. And he was very, very cross.
I think so.
And
for that reason.
He was being interviewed at St John's College. He was in the rooms that look onto Trinity Street.
Yeah.
And this officer was sitting behind the desk and with his back to the window. And John was so cross because they wouldn't let him, because he actually had a private plane in South Africa. He could fly a plane. He was already a pilot, but they wouldn't take him because of the language. And he took a fist. He just lost his temper, and he knocked this chap out of the window. The window was open. He gave him a punch and knocked him, and he came down onto, luckily, the canvas top. So he wasn't injured.
Goodness.
So then they shut John up in the basement somewhere, and I remember they let him out, and he came out to us. He wanted then to get out and go back to South Africa. Yeah. He realised that he wasn't going to be a pilot. He wasn't going to stay. And I think they let him go.
Do you remember who the school teachers were then?
Bruns, Mrs. Bruns.
That's right, yes, I can remember
And her
hearing
sister.
about them. Yes.
There were three of them, the two sisters and the brother lived in the schoolhouse. They were great sort of three, because he looked after them, the brother did, and the two sisters taught in school.
Yes. Did they
And-
take part in the village? I mean,
Yes, they did. Yes, they
feats
did.
and things?
Oh, yes, they did. They take part in this church.
Yes.
They were good churchgoers and helped in the
Nice,
church as
yeah.
well.
Yes. Right. It didn't come here until 51. Neither the electricity nor
No,
mains
it was
water.
after the war.
Mains water and
Yes.
electricity in 1951.
Was it 51?
Because
Yes.
that was the year we came here. Arthur
Oh,
and I
yes.
came to live in the top floor of the rectory.
Oh, yes. And we had light then, electricity then, I
Yes.
think.
Well, Leo had a donkey engine in the garden, which
I know we had.
manufactured light.
Yes,
for
I know
us.
we had a basis, but it wasn't all over the house.
No, I'd got one plug upstairs from which we put in, highly illegal nowadays, lots and lots of others.
Yes.
And at least had one over the stairs, and
Yes.
one in the kitchen, I think, and one in the dining room. Lived in those mostly, except for the oil lamps in the other room. If the donkey engine failed, all the lights went out. So that's going back a bit.
And pumping up the water. Oh,
Oh, yes, yes. The great big patch under the yard in front of what was the stables, which is an enormous patch really, was all
tank.
a tank, wasn't it?
Yes, still is, of course.
Yes, yes. And it took 300 strokes to get enough water up to the top of the house so that you could have it come down again. And who was it? Was it Reg used to come and pump sometimes?
Oh,
No,
Reg
no,
did, but
Mr.
was
Doggett.
yes,
Doggett.
Cyril Doggett.
Cyril Doggett.
Yes, but Reg used to do quite a lot of pumping, and of course, when the soldiers came from the searchlight unit, they would come and do some pumping
Oh,
of
did they?
water.
Yes. Where was the searchlight unit?
Well, it was halfway up Scotland Farm Road, and then they moved it a little nearer Scotland Farm. There were two different sites over the
Yes.
period of the war. Well, in those days, of course, you had the baker coming twice a week, and you had I often say it was much easier. You had the groceries coming, the grocery van coming,
Yes.
the oil man coming,
Yes.
and a man with the low tension for the radio.
Oh, I didn't remember that. The big orchards at the end
Supplied a lot of fruit for the country.
supplied a lot
Yes.
of fruit to Chivers, I suppose. Was it to
No,
Chivers? Or?
no, it wasn't Chivers. It was Warren's orchard.
Warren's orchard, yes, but
Yes.
didn't he supply the fruit to
No,
Chivers?
it used to take it to Leeds, or it used to go on
that's
a on a,
right, yes,
tr-
it
on
used
a
to.
lorry,
Quite a long way, yes, I'd forgotten that.
and Leicester, I think.
Yes. Oh, that is going back. Yes. Talking of
Yes.
Reg, there's a lovely story of Reg, but that was when we'd come to live here.
Yes.
So I don't know what year, it would have been about 53, 54. He came to me one day and he said, Joy, there's a swarm of bees along the road, if you'd like to get it, because by that time Arthur was keeping bees in the rose garden up
Yes, yes, I remember Leah kept
And,
bees there too.
He said, would you like to come and get it? And I said, oh, yes, thank you, Reg. I got a box and put it on the back of my bicycle, took a blanket, and we went, about a third of the way along, just past Frohawk's farm entry. And there was this swarm of bees on a large branch just in the hedge. And Reg stood well back and he let me cut it down and put it into my box and cover it with a blanket and cycle home with this swarm behind me. And after we'd finished it all, Reg said, good on you, girl. And I said, well, thank you, Reg, for letting us collect an extra swarm. He said, well, I wouldn't have gone near it. And I said, why not? He said, well, they've been there 3 days. And I said, well, yes, fair enough. He said, well, they can sting you after 2 days. Apparently bees fill themselves up with honey before they swarm, so they
Yes.
don't need to feed
Yes,
for 2 or 3 days.
Yes.
But by the 3rd day, they're getting hungry.
yes, and they start
And
to
they
get a
come
bit
away
nasty.
and sting you.
Yes,
Well, he wasn't going to have anything to do with it. He let me take it. I did get one small sting, but it wasn't bad. And he said, there she was with a big swarm on the back of her bicycle. Well, he told that story himself.
he was a character,
Oh, it's a tremendous
a
character.
rough diamond. one of our best friends.
I discovered that he had trained as a gamekeeper in the house almost next door to us in Fenstanton. Yes.
Oh,
he
yes.
told me years later.
Yes, he didn't talk much about his training.
No.
He did talk about his time in India when he was
Did
in
he?
the army.
I don't think I heard much about that.
But of course, he was a great countryman, wasn't he? He knew where to find the
yes.
mushrooms,
Oh yes, yes, yes.
and he used to keep the road so clean, and
Yes.
he knew everybody who came into the village. He'd spot a stranger very quickly.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure. Yes, yes. And he wouldn't teach you how to do things. He'd show you.
Yes.
Or else he'd let you make your own mistakes, and then he'd tell you, and tell you why.
Yes.
At one time, you and your dad had a lot of wood, great long chunks of logs, which we could have for firewood at Hardwick. So
Yes.
we borrowed your pony and trap, and we filled up the trap with all these logs, and Reg sat and watched us. You taught us by then how to harness the pony, so we'd done that right.
Yes.
And we picked up a very large log, it must have been sort of 1.5 foot across, a really big one, and put it on the top at the back.
Yes.
And the weight was too much, and the trap lifted backwards and lifted the pony off the ground. And the big thing rolled off, of course.
Yes.
And Reg said, "There, girl, you wouldn't have learned if I'd told you. Let you make your own mistakes." So we learned about it afterwards. Yes. And we had to put that thing right in the front and then put all the small logs on.
Put the pony back on the ground.
Yeah. Very surprised, didn't I?
Yes. We certainly had some laughs, didn't we?
Oh, goodness,
It was all very good.
There are hands that will welcome you in. There are lips I am burning to kiss. Two blue eyes that shine just because they are mine. And 1,000 things other men miss. It's the corner of heaven itself, though it's only a tumble down there. But with love brooding there, there's no place can compare with my little grey home in the west.